Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Creative Confidence Podcast, where we talk with subject matter experts about creativity, leadership, innovation, and growth. I'm Colita Stafford, Executive Design Director at IDEO. Quick reminder, if you're new, we open up the last portion of our podcast for your questions. So start thinking about them. And we'd love to hear where you're from. So drop in the chat where you're joining us from today. And we've got quite the range of people. I'm so excited for our conversation. We are speaking with IDEO's very own Michelle Lee. Welcome, Michelle.
Hello, so great to be here. And thank you all for joining. I'm loving seeing where y'all coming from. Some
We
maybe
got
right down the block in San Francisco to international. We got a good visual of Lori in the London bus and someone from the bottom of the sea. This is amazing.
That's new. That's a new one. I love it. As always, we're so happy all of you are here. We're going to be talking about why play and imagination are critical for problem solving, especially complex problems. We're going to cover things like how toy and play and game design can influence complex problem solving. And my favorite part, Michelle's going to share some tangible tips and activities for how you can bring more play into your problem solving process. So I want to give a proper introduction to Michelle. But before I do that, I have a question for all of you joining today, a warm up. And so get ready. You're going to have to start getting creative right away. This question, by the way, is from Michelle. So we want you to come up with the most outrageous use for a drinking glass. It can be with or without water. Michelle, you have one with you right now, yes?
Yes, yes. For those who are able to
Yes.
see on the webcast portion, this is your visual, but feel free to reference any shaped glass you'd like.
Yes. So go ahead and in the chat, please, come up with the most outrageous use for a drinking glass. So while you're doing that, Michelle, you can check out what people come up with.
Oh my
Let me give
gosh, there's some good
Michelle
ones.
let me give Michelle a proper bio intro. So she is our expert on play. She's a partner and managing director at IDEO and a play expert. She has worked across a diverse range of industries, not just toys and games, but healthcare, government, education, food and beverage. Through her work, she's helped solve a variety of challenges, such as helping clients enhance workplace culture. She's championed responsible digital design. She's helped inspired underrepresented students to pursue careers in STEM. And she supports organizations as they adopt practices in line with circular economy. Michelle has quite a lot of expertise in play and design. She's presented at South by Southwest, the Delight Conference, and numerous podcasts and articles. So, Michelle, we are so delighted to have you here today. Thank you for joining us. So let's get into it. So, Michelle, what are some of the uses you're seeing for a drinking glass? And I'd love to know, what did you come up with?
I am so impressed. You guys are so good. These are flying past so fast. I've seen lanterns, I've seen musical instruments, I've seen shoes and spyglasses. I see some like bras in there and lampshades. It definitely gets the imagination going. So I am loving this. I who knows that I like to insert small rodents in my answers. So I went with a soaking tub for a baby squirrel. I find that, that kind of is outrageous enough that kind of helps people break out and feel free to throw out even more outrageous ones than anything involving a squirrel.
Love it. I love it. So, for all of you, thank you for playing along, everyone. There is a method to why we asked this question, and you're going to have to stay with us for a moment for why. So, stay tuned. First, let's dive in with Michelle about your story. So, I understand you started in engineering and aerospace, and then eventually made the transition to toy and play design. Please say more. How and why this trajectory?
Yeah. Well, I think growing up, I often told people that I love math and science, and I also love to draw. And coming from a family of, relatively recent immigrants, first generation, second generation on the other side, I think there was a real bent on like, what's the practicality? Although I have to say, my parents have been so supportive and always been like, we work hard so that you can, explore your dreams and push wide. But there was a sense of responsibility and this feeling like I need to do something that grown-ups do. I need to grow up at some point. I think we do what a lot of people do as they get older. They stop giving themselves that permission to play. And engineering felt like the very practical job. And
Mm.
Art could be that hobby that I did on the weekends or in the evenings. And so yeah, so went down the route of mechanical engineering, which I love for the problem solving, and that's a job that my head went to immediately when I thought about problem solving. Um, Ended up in internships in aerospace, and I don't want to bash aerospace because I know people who love it and it's good for so many things, but it was not right for me, and I think that's okay. There's certain things that aren't right for certain people, and part of it was because I was designing something that was like one smaller component, something much bigger. And granted, I was young, so my assignment was like to design a battery box that's 2 by 4 by 6, which I'd be like, I think you just designed it. um, and so I kind of had this crisis in college as I was about to graduate, and I saw automotive and aerospace kind of showing up as the primary companies and job fairs. And so I kind of just started telling everyone I wanted to make toys. It was after just being in some friend's room late at night and seeing toys all over his room. I was like, someone has to make those. And maybe that's one way that I can keep playing, give myself permission to play. I'm like, that will be my job. And so I think from early on, I was trying to find ways to overlap work and play. And that was the most reasonable way. So I went into toys, and it was great making products for kids, and just, sky's the limit. There's very few constraints on what you can do when you're designing toys, like definitely budget and timeline and stuff like that. But in terms of what your concept can be, can go extremely wide. So that was exciting. Um,
So I love this. And you, from the beginning, you mentioned you have a very problem-solving kind of orientation. So how has working in toy and play influenced how you think as a problem solver? What are some of the lessons you've learned, and how do you apply that to now how you solve problems?
yeah. So I think the contrast of going from engineering to toy design was pretty stark for me.
Okay.
Um, not to gloat, but I think I was a pretty good student, which sometimes student in the school sense is different from student in the life sense. And I think
Mm,
student in the school sense, when I say I was a good student, I was really good at understanding what I need to do to get ace a test. So if you told
mm,
me what I needed to study, I would study it, and I would do well on the test, and I'd get my A, and then I'd figure out where to go from there. What's the next test I need to pass? I wouldn't necessarily remember the content a couple weeks later because
mm,
my goal was to pass the test. And as an engineer, especially going through school, my goal was to get the answer in the back of the book.
mm.
There was a set answer. Someone had already
One
figured out
answer,
one
like,
answer,
mm-hmm,
one right answer.
mm-hmm,
And I think there was an awakening at one point, especially when I found design, that there is no one right answer. And even for engineering, when you get into the real world, there's all kinds of things that come in that change what that answer could be that you have to take in. And you have to be creative in thinking about how you solve the problem. And a lot of the problems don't have solutions. I mean, if we had
yeah,
all the problems solved, this world would be, in some ways better, but also maybe more boring. It's the constant problem solving and trying to find new ways to come up with solutions that I think keeps things interesting. And that was a big learning for me,
got
that
it.
in toys, like we need to go wide, we need to come up with new ideas. And that's a lesson I've brought back to me even as I tackle other problems in other industries now.
Yeah. So thanks for sharing that. I've heard you talk about how play, there's something about the process that is different, that enables you to get to different outcomes. Can you say a little bit more about that, or what's important about the process when you think about play?
Yeah. So play, I think of play really as a mindset and a behavior, how you approach things in life. Um, and there's something about when you approach something from a standpoint of play, again, it's about those many possibilities. It's not the one answer. It is about exploring, going wide, and thinking about what could be.
Mhm.
What are many different ways to approach it? What are many different ways you can think about the things that you maybe took for granted in the past? The other piece about play is that it is very active. So if you watch a child, they get to trying things right away. They are moving things around, whether in the physical world or the digital world. They're seeing how things fit together. They're trying things in different orientations.
Yeah.
They don't sit around and just talk about it. They don't write PowerPoints about what they think the plan should be. They just try it. And it is that bias towards action, that experimentation, that prototyping, the being okay with failing in service of learning and trying something different. Like it's not even called failing. It's just let's try it again. Um, and that spirit, I think, just gets you different places and approaching things with a spirit of curiosity and courageousness that can be just a great antidote to how I think a lot of the adults face challenges where we are just paralyzed in fear and
Mhm.
don't know where to start, or on the other side, just analyze it to death, to the point we never get to action.
So good. So let's tie it back to the warm-up question, Michelle, because you said one of the first things you think about with play is it's a mindset, and then you went to process. So tell us now we're going to unpack what's in your toolkit of your strategies as a play designer. So what was your purpose in asking that question? What was the rationale behind it? What were you intending to happen and unlock with that question?
Yeah. So I think play, a lot of it is thinking outside of the box. And if you have kids and you've watched them play, if you remember back to your own childhoods, a box was not just a container for carrying things from one part of the room to the other. A box could be a house. It could be a rocket ship. It could be a storefront where you could sell baked goods to your family. My brother did that. He made lots of money off of family members. um, it's like it really is a way of thinking about things that I think many adults look at and you only see one use. It's one
Mhm.
use that people have been applying for years. There's a lot of assumptions that we take for granted that it just has to be that way. And yes, a glass is a great way to get water to your mouth and stay hydrated. But think of all the other things you guys came up with. I was just in awe looking at all the other uses that you have there. Um, so yes, that is why I think look at all the objects around you. Look at through the eyes of a child who maybe has never seen it. Look at through the eyes like someone from outer space who has no clue what this object is. And then what are the possibilities and where can you use it in different ways in your own life?
So powerful. And I want to just ask people who participated to just think too how it made you feel. It felt inviting. Michelle, I've heard you talk about part of what you do when you bring play into the problem solving process is you're trying to create agency and joy for people as well. And so I hope a lot of you could feel that. The other thing I want to connect it to is the science of creative thinking very much shows that creative thinking is about making connections with seemingly unconnected things. And so play is one of the great ways to start to be in that space. So let's apply it to work and let's bring it in because I'm sure some of you, when we asked that question, thought, "Oh, this is just silly. It's frivolous. It doesn't have a place in work." Michelle, you would definitely argue otherwise. So
Yeah.
let's talk about why is it so important for work in or context where there's challenging problems to solve? Why is play important for problem solving in particular?
Absolutely. And I'm trying to catch all these comments as I go by because there are so many. I love how active this group is. But one of the words that struck me was powerful. Someone put that this
Mm.
play makes them feel powerful. And I think that's so important. Um, I'm going to just reflect a little bit back to kids because I learned so much from kids. And for kids, if you read a lot about Maria Montessori, it talks about how play is the work of children. Um, and kids face a world that they don't know a lot about, and it can be really daunting. And it's a world where people tell them no all the time. If you think about it, it's not too different from our world as adults. Like, a lot of people tell us no. There's a lot we don't have figured out. And so I think that's where play is such a great way for us to look at the world because it served us so well as children. So why would we give it up? Why would we stop giving ourselves permission to use what was our most powerful tool as children and made us feel, yeah, powerful and like we had agency and that we could change the
Mhm.
outcome. And so it is this idea that we can go in, that we can make a difference in the world, that we have the ability to again, think outside of the box and challenge the assumptions that we are faced with to say, well, maybe there is a way to get around that. Um, and I think a big piece of it is as we have this spirit of like, it's okay to experiment, it's okay to try things. We also realize we're de-risking. We gain confidence as we
Ah,
go, and we bring other people into the story with us. And I mean, there's very many dimensions of play. Social play is a big one. Social play allows you to bring people into problem solve alongside you so you're not alone. It also is a way to get a number of different perspectives in there. And I think that's
yeah.
so important. Um, we're talking about how complex problems are growing. It's getting feels some in some ways it's getting harder and harder. We don't have to do it alone. So how do we instigate
Yeah.
social play, and how do we institute active, tangible play to start building
Yeah.
and get ourselves out of paralysis and fear?
There's a couple points you made. I just want to pause and just honor how powerful those are. So one you talked about was actually experimenting or taking risks, actually de-risks. That sounds so counterintuitive, but so important. And just it's this idea of the more possibilities helps you helps you not shut down ideas too soon. It actually de-risks. And I also love too, you said, the more complex problems feel, the more we need other people and we need different ways of thinking. And so, I think it's kind of counterintuitive to when things feel complex, I think we all tend to want to go more rigid. And you would say the opposite. You're saying like, no, we need to actually bring play in. So why is it like so important in particular today, like this idea of play?
Yeah, I mean, we're touching on complexity, and
Mhm.
I think this world's complex. I'm not gonna lie, it's been tough. The last few years have kind of caused us all to swivel a little bit and try to reground ourselves. And there's many reasons for it. I mean, and part of it is that we're more connected. Part of it is the spread of information. Part of it is that everything feels like it's more of a systems challenge. And so there's many players involved, whether we like it or not. And information spreads really quickly. When we do come up with a solution, it can spread very fast. The impact we
Mm,
can have is huge, which is why I think as designers, we've been adding a fourth circle to our Venn diagram. It's been growing. I mean, before, we always had starting with human desirability and how do we make sure that what we're designing is something people actually want in their lives. We had technical feasibility. How do we make sure we can create and implement our ideas? We had business viability. How do we make sure this is sustainable on a financial front? But more and more, we have to think about responsibility as that fourth circle. Like, how are we making sure that what we do will not have consequences that we don't intend, that doesn't hurt people in ways that don't mean? How do we make sure we have those voices in early? Um, so, yes, I mean, all of this, just how connected our world is great
mhm.
in many ways, but adds complexity because everything we do can spread very quickly as well.
Thank you for that. So maybe you could give us a really let's go into a story, an example to just connect how something seemingly complex, when you introduce playful thinking and it gets you to different types of solutions. Do you have a story?
Oh, I have so many stories. All right. Yeah, I mean, one of the places I love bringing play is into the conversation about climate. I mean, talk about a challenge that we all have to face and that we are seeing implications on a daily basis. Given that, I think a lot of us feel a lot of pressure, and my mind goes to the dog in flames meme where we literally feel like the world is burning around
Mm,
us,
mm,
and we feel like we need to get the right answer and that we can't. Yeah, this is fine. Thank you, Rachel. You've got it. That's this is fine meme. And it it really can paralyze you. Like you feel like you have to
mhm,
get it right from the start. And we get so stuck in like, okay, well, who are all the people we have to involve right away? What is the right answer? Like, oh, we can't try this because this might have issues. And we shut down
mhm,
ideas really
mm,
quickly. How do we shift that to the playful mindset where it is, okay, progress is the number one thing here, not
uh,
about getting it right from the very start? How do we explore many possibilities, invite people to help us think about new ways of approaching this? How do we challenge some of the assumptions of how we've done things in the past? How do we shut off that part of our brain that says, no, it's going to cost more. No, we have to change out our whole manufacturing line, so that we can dream a little bit? Because dreaming allows us to kind of see things, a different future than what we have today. And we can't start moving towards a different future unless we can see it. And so sometimes we have to let ourselves go a little bit free and have that chance to play, to imagine. And then we can go back and figure out what do we need to do to get
mhm,
there. But it's so much harder to start with the constraints and then figure out how to push it to something new than to let yourself dream and then go figure out how to turn that into reality.
mhm. Do you have a specific client or
Yes.
group you've worked with?
Sorry,
It's beautiful.
I
It's
got
beautiful.
distracted in my own conversation there. But yes, yes. So I think a really good example of where we've done this in the climate space is we have worked with closed loop partners on a couple different projects. One was around how to replace a single-use plastic bag. The other one that I can zero on a little bit more right now is like the Next Gen Cup Challenge. This was with Next Gen, which is a consortium. And what's really interesting is it's a consortium that involves organizations that you might typically think of as competitors. So McDonald's is in there, but so is Wendy's. Starbucks isn't in there, but so is
Yeah.
Pete's.
Yeah.
Coke and Pepsi are in there. Um, and I think it's because they realize that some of the challenges we have to face with replacing the drinking cup, the disposable paper cup that we all know, is that we have to work together.
It impacts so many organizations. Yeah.
Yeah, if we change it in one place, but then it's a completely different system in another place, it just confuses consumers. So how do we work together? And so the Next Gen Consortium, working alongside closed loop partners who help manage this whole program, was looking at this. And the first thing that we did together was open this up through an open innovation challenge. And I think right by doing that is saying there's multiple solutions. What do
Got it.
people have? What are people already working on? How do we bring that into the picture and consider all these different ways we can approach it? Some of it was more bio-based, eco-friendly materials for that cup so that we can put it into our different composting streams or other streams. Others were, how do we create a cup that we can reuse? And what's a system for taking that cup and giving it out and then collecting it back? And there's so much complexity in all of that. And it involves the retailers, it involves the people making this, it involves the materials people, it involves the waste streams at the end. So it really takes bringing people together. And
Mhm.
again, like looking at this as what are the possibilities? How do we work together? How do we like have that social play where we bring people together who are often trying to figure out how to one up each other and actually have them work together?
I see.
Um, and then we took this into pilot. So it was as we developed ideas, we made friends with a number of cafes in Palo Alto, friendly locations that would give us some room for trial and error and a little bit of failure, creating that safe space where we could put our prototypes into the world, see how they were received from the consumer point of view, but also from other people in that chain.
Hmm.
So, what did the baristas think? Um, and utilizing things like role play, where we walk through what is that situation? How do we imagine this new cup falling into the current cafe environment? And writing out a script for that, trying it out, and then taking that to the actual baristas. Role play is a huge part of what
Hmm.
we do.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Oh, I love it. And just what is the impact? So when you get groups working together in this way, imagining many possibilities, testing them out in safe spaces, like for the cup example in particular, what could be the impact of that? Like what's the current problem and
Yeah. I mean, we as a whole produce 250 billion paper cups a year. That's a lot of cups. And while they look like paper, they're lined with plastic. And that is a problem when you have two different materials together. You can't just throw that into typical recycling streams. Some cities have it, but very few. And I know like places like Europe have a one up on us on that. So it depends on where you live. That this might be something that's easier in other places. But nevertheless, so much energy and resources going into producing these cups. And then if they can't go into a system that can regenerate them, recycle them, then they end up in our landfills as well. So, I mean, that's huge. If we can figure out
it's
how
huge.
to
Yeah.
not produce so many cups to keep the cups we're using in the system longer, that's incredible impact. So that's something we're continuing to prototype, continue to explore. Next Gen and Closed Loop are continue to do pilots and bring in more partners for all of
That's
this.
so exciting. So thank you for that story. I am going to have you unpack one other thing in your toolkit that you just revealed through that story. And it wasn't obvious. It's only because I've heard you talk about it before. Let's get even more tangible because we have a lot of comments in the threads. People are like, this sounds great, but how do I bring along skeptics? Like this won't work for
Yes.
my problem. Okay. In that story, you said things like you created conditions for many possibilities to come in the room. You intentionally went to like a cafe where there's a safe place. I have heard you talk about this idea of a what you call the magic circle. And it's an approach that helps you set conditions for people to behave differently and more playful. Can you tell us more about that and how you use it in these very complex, important problems? What's the magic
For
circle, Michelle?
sure.
Yep.
For sure. And yes, that is my number one question. It's like, this sounds great. I love it. How do I bring other people into it? How do I bring it to especially industries and organizations that might feel like they have
Yep.
a lot of regulation and a lot of constraints? Um, and oh yes, yes, I love this, Eva. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but joining there with Huizinga, exactly. So Johann Huizinga wrote about the magic circle. He has the first credit to using that term. 1938, his book Homo Ludens, which was really about exploring the cultural value of play.
Okay.
And when he talked about it, the magic circle was any place where you can enter and it's a space that plays by different rules. So, yes, that could be a game of chess where once you start playing
Mm,
chess, there's very specific rules to that game. It could also be a place of worship. It could be a court of law. It could be a theater. If you
mm,
think about it, when you enter those places, you know that there's something different. You know that's not quite the reality that you experience just out on the street. You also know that when you walk out of those doors, that you go back to your reality.
mm.
Um, it was then adopted later on and made more widespread in the gaming industry. That was Eric Zimmerman, and also it was Katie Salen
Katie
as well.
Salen.
Yep,
Hmm.
and they had a book around game design
Hmm.
and really talking about when we design games, how do we think about that? How do we think about the different rules we're creating, the space that we're creating for a different form of play? And my team, the Play Lab here at IDEO, loves using the magic circle in very intentional ways. I mean, one thing I should say is all of IDEO is very playful. There's, I think, a difference from being playful and the intentionality that our team really brings to it in terms of creating the conditions for play for lots of people to play. And we study up on it, which is why we're reading things like Huizinga and Katie Salen and Zimmerman's work. But how do we create this space where people can come in and where they can feel like they can let loose? Because in the everyday
Hmm.
world,
Hmm.
we are rewarded for saying no. We are rewarded
Mm.
for being the person who's smart in the room and can be like, oh, but don't forget about budget. But don't forget, these are our manufacturing constraints. And we need to have a space where we say, like, okay, that's great. But in this space, you're rewarded for thinking wide. You're rewarded for
Yeah.
imagining. And we actually don't want to hear about those constraints right now. You can bring them back later. And sometimes you very physically have to create a magic circle. So we've done
Mm.
everything from where we hold our brainstorms in one room, but we kind of start in um, like an ante room where we're just like, okay, we're starting here. And before we go into the other room to brainstorm, everyone write down on a post-it what is occupying
Uh-huh.
your mind right now? What will keep you from going in there and just thinking very freely? And then we put those post-its like on the table and we leave them. We're like, great, now let's enter this other room. These post-its will still be here when you come back, but we're going to leave them behind for a little bit. For extra pizzazz, we've even done things like brought colorful rainbow hats with propellers on top. Just be like, we're literally putting on our kids' hats as we go into this other room. And as we go into this other room, hopefully people then feel that safety and the ability to let down their guard and to take a few more risks in their ideas. So that's highly
Mhm.
important. Um, and it is about baby steps, right? Like this is where
Mm.
I think human-centered design and play come hand in hand because I strongly do not believe in forced fun.
Yeah,
Um,
because like some of these things can sound like they're shallow fun, or like you're just trying to make it zany, but you actually have a very purposeful approach to what the conditions you're creating. Say
yeah.
more. And like you said, it's baby steps. What does that mean?
Yeah. So again, I mean, it's very, very intentional in how we apply
Hmm.
play. We have all of these warm-ups, creative warm-ups. My former colleague, Brendan, who helped start the Play Lab, really called them ice crushers. But like warm-ups for the brain and getting people to get acclimated to a new space, but knowing that they might be coming from a place where there's hierarchy, where the CEO's in the room, and why well, we want to wait for him to speak first. And we need to shut all that down. We need to be like, it's safe. This is okay. Let's do something different. Um, and so some of that might be a simple exercise like blast off to the moon, which is another one that Brendan really introduced. And that just is a simple couple of minutes of everyone close your eyes. Imagine you're blasting off to the moon. What do you see out there? And then sharing how that's different for
Mm.
adults and children because adults are task oriented.
Mm.
They go to the moon, they come back. And it's straightforward. They got the task done, but it's not as creative as a
It's
child
the
who gets lost out there.
Answer in the back of the book. One
Exactly.
answer. Hmm.
Exactly. And I think when we're like, look at how much more creative a child is when you ask them what they did when they were in space, because they're
Yes.
spinning around in space, they're exploring other planets, they're meeting space creatures. And they're like, now bring that energy that a kid has to this problem we have here. And they're like, oh, wow, I remember. So I mean, that's the other thing.
Hmm.
Play is something that a lot of us did as children.
Hmm.
And so if we can help people recall what that spirit of play was and remember how powerful it was with children, it's easier for them to say like, okay, I get it. Let me apply it again now. Um, but again, I'm not going to throw you in right away and be like, all right, get up in the front of the room and perform
Right.
something in the first 5 minutes. I need to get you there slowly. Um,
And I also
and
hear you say you're not doing it frivolously. You're not doing it just like, hey, we're going to play now. There's intentionality connected to a real business need, which is about problem solving.
yes. Yes, it is. It's all about that. And so when we do that blast off exercise, it's about helping people understand the importance of diverging before we
Mm,
converge, because that going to the moon back is converging. It's getting the job done, which we have to do at some
yeah.
point. But the moment when we're brainstorming is about diverging. And that's when you want the kid's hat on. And so we do that exercise to help people understand. And I brought that into a project where our team was just feeling the pressure because it was a
Mm,
project around sustainable packaging. And at the same time, this company had tried to put out their products in a cardboard box because they're like, that's sustainable. Let's do that. But their sales went
mm,
down because it was such an iconic
okay.
brand and they lost the joy. And
Ah,
sustainability should not feel like a sacrifice, it should
mm,
not be devoid of play. And so we want to bring those together. But the team felt like they had no room to do that because every time they got in there, it was marketing saying, you decreased my billboard. I can't get my messaging on there. It was the people who had relationships with retail who said like you can't stock these packages. It's too hard. It made it harder to put them on shelf. Um, and that morning I was like, you know what? I think this is exactly a moment where we have to blast off to the moon. And I went in and I was like, all right, pause before we go into sharing concepts.
mm,
Let's do this simple thought
mm,
exercise. And of course, people are like, what are we doing? But this is a simple one, right? Just close your eyes. It's not that hard. I'm not asking you to get up and role play. It's a simple first baby step. But it brought the understanding and it gave us permission to then just say, like, okay, hold off on the nose. Let's
mhm.
see what's interesting here and
Yeah.
push it a little bit wider. And don't worry, you'll bring your nose back in later when we try to figure out how to make this real, but it's not the
Yeah.
time for it.
Mm, that's so powerful. I have a follow-up. We're going to start to move to questions um, on this kind of idea of frivolous or just baby steps. Someone asks, are there words to use other than play? Because for some contexts, it feels
Yeah.
like that just doesn't fit like executive leadership or the conditions of your work or community. Like this person, I work in medical with many regulations and risk.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on
Yes.
that?
Yeah. I mean, I use some of the words that I think I've been sprinkling here throughout. It's like, how do you create engagement? How do you bring in more
Mm,
stakeholders? How do you surface different perspectives? How do you help people be more generative in their ideas? How do we de-risk? De-risk is a good one because people are like, that's exactly what we want to do. We want to de-risk. Um, how do we get tangible? Like, how do we not just sit here and just talk the whole time? How do we put something out in the world? The idea of prototyping something and trying it out resonates so well. Um, so yes, those are some of the words that I would use. But I also had a moment where I realized at some point I want to bring play in, but it's even better when someone else uses the word play before
uh,
me because there's something very special about play. Um, and I think play captures that there's also an aspect of joy in this, and we can't forget the joy if we get too hung up on we're just trying to increase engagement or we're just de-risking. It can get very serious again.
mhm,
Um, and so that's where, yes, I might start with other words, but I do like to bring play in. I'm not shy in saying that I lead a group called the Play Lab, which often people are like, why are you here? Why? And then once I start explaining, people start nodding. They're like, oh, we get this. Give us more of that.
mhm. This is so wonderful, Michelle. And we have quite a few questions. You've been watching the chat. So we're going to go there. Let's go to some. And I'm going to stay on this thread of the risking, de-risking. This comes from Richard. And basically, can you talk more about the place of risk assessment in relation to playing? And again, there's some environments where it's this idea of play doesn't resonate, but de-risking does. Can you say a little bit
Yes.
more about how Richard might bring this into his context?
Yeah. I mean, it's all about, I think the word experiment helps a lot
Okay. Hmm.
when it's not like what I'm doing is gonna be a permanent change. That scares people, right? Like when you're like, I am gonna figure out how to make this more sustainable. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, that means a huge investment. It means I need to change out all these lines. The coffee cup example, it's like Starbucks has how many stores? Like that's huge, massive. It's like, no, no, no. This is an experiment. We want to start with one store. We want to start with a smaller group of people. We just want to try something. We're gonna try it for 2 weeks, like time box it.
Oh, I
Um,
love that.
and we're only going to try these things. It's only going to cost us much because if you've taken any of the IDEO prototyping classes, you know the 3 R's of rough, rapid, right. So that first prototype is not a shiny, expensive prototype. It's like, what's the quickest thing you can do in the roughest way possible that answers the right question? So if you can help them understand that this is an experiment, you're trying to answer these certain questions, and it's only going to take these resources
Hmm.
only for this amount of time, and that we're going to do this intentionally with these questions, and that through this
Hmm.
process, we're going to aim to answer these. And from there, there's a roadmap beyond this, like based on the answers to these questions, whether we proved our initial assumptions were right or found something else that was interesting, we'll have a way to go from here, and we'll run another prototype and then another prototype. Um, and I think that helps just when
Yeah.
it's not, we're going to change up your whole world and it's going to cost a lot of money. That scares people.
Yeah.
We're going to learn little by little. And as you learn little by little, that de-risks it so that you're not putting a large investment at any point. You're learning a little bit as you go.
That's so insightful. I love how you said that. We're going to learn little by little. Yep. So let's go to a couple more. This one is around the time crunch when people. So one person asks, "Well, what about when there's no time?" Or Michael, advice for how to inject play when there's a looming deadline. And like Michelle, you gave a good example of you could sense when a team felt really overwhelmed, and I'm sure in that context there was a deadline, there was a lot of constraints. So how do you what are what's your advice for those moments when it doesn't feel like there's time? Yeah.
Yeah. First thing I do is I ask a lot of questions. So I haven't touched on this, but a lot of play is curiosity. And again, watching kids, they ask why over and over and over again. Part of play is challenging assumptions. So my first question is like, what are the constraints? Why is this timeline here? And is there actually any leeway? I mean, sometimes we hear there's a meeting or that they need a certain bit of information to get past that milestone. They might not need all the pieces, but like what are the pieces we need to solve by that time? So that might just getting to what the real deadlines are can help
Okay.
just take some of the pressure off. But then, time is real. So again, experiments come in all sizes. What is the right one that fits within that? What is the most pressing question? You don't have to answer all the questions at once. What's the biggest blocker right now that would help? Or the other way to go about it is like, what's the one thing you can answer, the one experiment you can run that will give you more leeway? What is the thing that will start building belief? We call them beacons a lot. What is that
Hmm.
smaller project that will show a tangible result or show that a certain process has promise so that you then have more ability to push on that further and try something else? Um, and if you have a product release, it's very real. You've got the press release out and you've promised retailers you have it on market at a certain point. I think also wondering if that's like the end product. Like roadmaps are really interesting, right? It's like, what is year one, but what's year two? What is year three? And I think sometimes just thinking longer term. Um, we touched on this maybe a little bit, but
Hmm.
yeah, the end product, when we put all of our thoughts there,
Yeah.
it can get very high pressure. If we think more about process, that takes some of that off. So is that milestone like the end? Or is it part of the process? And if it's part of the process, what comes after? And how do you build upon this? How do you see learning moments throughout what you're doing?
Hmm. I love that. I mean, just going back to what you said, like the magic circle and how sometimes you create physical spaces, you can time bound these moments too. You can have a moment that isn't about an entire week. It can be 1 hour of thinking differently and just relieving some of that constraint. Um, on the topic of constraint, I have one more. You're going to love this one, Michelle, because I know you think about this. This comes from Diana. How about how do you use constraints to create boundaries for play and fuel even more creative thinking?
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. So, this is one of those areas when people hear play, they often go to free play, and there should be
Mm,
no constraints, and we should go wide. And in truth, constraints they go hand in hand with play. Like, I mean, going back to the magic circle and
yeah.
Huizing and game design, that's all about creating a space and creating rules within that space that we play within. And constraints can be very freeing if we use them in the right way. Um, I was just with a team the other day and we're thinking about a new line of toys. And I think when we have a blank slate, we come up with lots of ideas, but sometimes it just runs wild and all over the place. And then we're like, oh, how would we apply it to this license or this license? And it actually became a chance for us to kind of one narrow in on one, but it freed us up to go even wide again because we're like, oh, when we think of that, it opens up all these other ideas. It definitely gives us a chance to think a little bit wider. Um, and then I think constraints are good because we also can't
Yeah.
diverge forever. Like again, like the design process is a series of diverging and converging. So at some point you're like, okay, let's switch out that kid's hat for an adult hat. And that's where we exit the magic circle for a bit. And we say, now that we have all these ideas, what are the ones we're most excited about? What are the ones that are most promising? And how do we use those constraints to go through more of the strategic planning, as Jennifer Riel, our
Yep.
chief strategy officer, would say, like, what would need to be true to make this vision a reality? And then the constraints are great because they get you to action. They get you to the point that you actually produce something. So
Hmm.
it's that back and forth. Like,
Yeah.
how do you look at both of them hand in hand and not as separate things?
Yeah. What I love about your stories and your experience, Michelle, is you are pulling from this whole range of ways of thinking, sometimes strategic, very much focused on constraints, realities, budgets, time, and creativity, imagination, play. And you don't say one is better than the other. You use them differently in different moments and modes. And I think that's one of the big ideas that we hope we hope is coming across in this conversation. Is like this is not one way. It's an addition to your range of how you can look at problems. Um, so I do have one last one, and then we're gonna start to wrap it up. And it goes back to a topic I know you care about. It's bringing in diverse perspectives and different perspectives. So we have a few questions around again. How do you any last tips on how to bring play to people who might be skeptical of it, or especially I love this one. I wonder how we may offer the play way to executives or people who may resist trying it. Any
Yes.
last thoughts on that?
Yes. So, my three ingredients to play are first, you have to have psychological safety and physical safety too. Like you have to feel safe. You have to have a sense of trust that you
Mm,
can play because in a society where we don't give people permission to play, it can feel risky. So, how do we
yeah.
create that safe space? Once you feel that, how do we help people feel agency that they can actually affect the game so they want to participate? They know they have an active role they can play. But then again, joy being the third ingredient. Joy has to be that thing that sustains because we're not going to keep going unless we have joy to keep us excited and engaged and happy about what we're doing. Like joy is a very powerful emotion. I think that's what we need to sustain anything we do. Um, and but trust is a big one. You have to get through that
Yeah.
first. And I had a great conversation with Neil, who's one of star designer on the play team, and he is on a very challenging project. It's international. It's in another culture that um, has skepticism about play. It's in
Okay.
education that's complicated and again, systems involve lots of different people. And he's like, it's amazing. Like the team embraces play. And when I walked in there, you could tell they were like, we don't want to do this. But I'm like, Neil, how did you do it? He's like, first step is I just came in as a human. I came in as
Mm.
curious. I came in as not threatened. He's 6 feet tall. He's like, he's like, I came in because I wanted to learn about their culture. I understand where they were coming from. That built the trust. It built the psychological safety. It did not come in full force, like, we're gonna do this play whether you like it or not. Again, not forced fun.
Right.
And then from there, he could then be like, great, what's a safe way to do this? And I love this. They had a big event coming up. It was the first time they were going in front of potential customers. I mean, they did research with potential customers, but this
Mhm.
is when we're like, we're going to present our offer. Scary, scary moment. And he's like, let's role play it. But he went
Mm.
beyond just role play. He brought candles into the room. He wrote a script that was like a play. So they walked in and he's like, okay. And the lights dim and there's a
Mm.
crowd that's buzzing. You enter stage right. And immediately it put people in another state of mind, but
Mm.
almost calmed them because they're like, oh my gosh, this is a hard moment. How do we do this? But it started with trust. It started with this creation of safety. Then it went to agency, like, we're going to do
Mm.
this. We're going to help you. You have a role to play. You can affect this. And then the joy of like, oh my gosh, what is this? And this is so fun. And he's converted them into true believers, where they're like, let's do it again. We could use that. It helped us be in a much better state. And if anything, it was safer because I wasn't doing this for the
Oh.
first time in front of new customers. I did this in front of trusted people. And yeah, it was hard, but I was in a trusting, safe environment where I had friends to help me through it. Um, so how do we build that up? But it starts with being human, and play is something that all humans naturally, like animals also, it's play is such a key part of being a living being. Um,
Hmm.
so how do we start with being human and then go from there? And then read people. I didn't even get into this, but if you want to ever ask me about High and his theory of flow and how I think that applies to the social dynamics of also reading your crowd and understanding their comfort
Mhm.
level, and then
Mhm.
increasing the level of play based on what you're reading and how comfortable people are. I think that all is part of human-centered design, but how you bring play in.
Amazing. That was so insightful, Michelle. What a great last question, too. And just thank you for making that point about you're always thinking about psychological safety, agency, and joy is part of what you're thinking about as you approach play. Oh my goodness. So people, I'm so sorry, but we are at the end of time. And I do have a little gift for those of you who are still with us and had been part of this conversation with Michelle Lee. So if you want more of Michelle, she is our instructor in our newest IDEO course. And as a thank you for attending, we have a 20% off coupon code. I'll give that to you in just a moment. So Michelle, I just want to give you the last question so you can think on it. And then I'm going to share a little bit more about your course, and then we're going to wrap up.
Okay.
Uh, so Michelle, and you can take your drink of water now too.
Thank you.
What advice would you have given to yourself at an earlier stage in your career? So again, thank you, Michelle, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We've been hearing from Michelle Lee, partner and managing director at IDEO. She is also the instructor of our newest course, Creative Thinking for Complex Problem Solving. It is launching on March 7th. It teaches you so many things of what Michelle has talked about, how to bring play and imagination to problem solving, how you can become a more dynamic problem solver who can shift as things adapt and change. And it's going to equip you to take on more of today's most intricate challenges with creative thinking and confidence. You can learn more at ideou.com/creative thinking. And again, as a thank you for attending, we have a 20% off coupon code for the course. You can redeem it until March 7th. Use Creative Thinking 20, all one word, at checkout. So with that, let's go back to you, Michelle. Final thoughts, advice for a younger stage, a younger Michelle.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna tie this full circle. So, um, my advice to my younger self is that there's not always an answer in the back of the book, and that's not something to be scared of. Like, that's an opportunity, and it's an opportunity for you to show up and make a difference in this world and to invite people on that journey with you. But it shouldn't be scary if you don't have it all figured out. A world of complexity is also a world of opportunity. And how do we embrace that? And how do we do it together? And how do we also have fun and enjoy it so we don't burn ourselves out? Let's not burn ourselves out. Let's take on these challenges day by day, take deep breaths, and find ways to do it with our friends, make new friends, and do it with energy and with joy and with play.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Enjoy your day. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Co. Thanks, everyone out there.